Good morning, Boker Tov. Welcome back to 10 Minutes of Meaning. Please help yourself to slushy, coffee, pastries in the lobby. We're very grateful, as always, to our generous sponsors of 10 Minutes of Meaning of our Tanya series, Marilyn and Michael Fedak. Thank you for your generosity. We gave an overview to Tanya, and last week we analyzed and we spoke about the title page of Sefer Tanya. It's an unusual thing that a book has so much packed into its title page. The title page itself is worth darshaning. So again, the disclaimer, I'm not teaching Tanya. I'm learning Tanya out loud together with you and making our way and trying to understand. So, Hakdama Samalake, the Balatanya, the Alter Rebbe begins with a Hakdama with an author's introduction, which we're not going to read word for word, but I'll summarize for you before we dive into the opening parak, the first parak of Tanya. And here, the Balatanya essentially justifies the writing and the publishing of Sefer Tanya. Why does he have to justify it? Because the first half of this introduction, the Balatanya explains why you cannot compare what you read in a book, what you learn in a sefer, with what you can derive and can extract from contact with a Rebbe, interpersonally, sitting and connecting, listening and learning, consulting and confiding. How can one begin to compare the one-on-one, what one sees in the tzaddik, how the tzaddik can see what's in your heart and in your soul, how they can respond to your reaction, to your question, to how well you absorb, with when one reads a book? He describes the Balatanya, the danger when one reads a book, they're reading it through the filter of their own mind and heart. They're reading it through their own understanding, which has limitations, and therefore may be superimposing on what they're reading. And therefore he writes, the author's introduction, in fact, was a letter, a pastoral letter that was sent in 1795, La'anshe Shlomenu. Now, Anshe Shlomenu is known today in an acronym as ANASH. ANASH. We use Anash to describe hardcore Chabad, Lubavitcher, authentic, genuine, raised in the tradition, the Anash, Anshe Shlomenu. And the Balatanya writes this letter, 1795, to the Anash, Anshe Shlomenu, Yivarchem Tzureinu v'Yishmereim, Hashem Arak, should bless them and should protect them. Which is interesting because he's writing that letter to those who are in that community around White Russia, in that area where Chabad Hasidus is spreading, to his disciples and to his Talmidim and Hasidim who have been coming to see him en masse. And he's writing to them this letter to explain why he's unable to have an audience with each of them individually, but why this medium of putting a pen to paper, of publishing this sefer, of collecting these communications and conversations is the best way to proceed. And he introduces it with La'anshe Shlomenu to Anash. It's fascinating because today there's a big movement and effort, and I guess officially, technically now we're part of it, to say that Tanya is not relevant only to Anash Anshe Shlomenu. Tanya is not written for the disciples and Hasidim of Chabad. It's for the entire world. Every Yid, every Jew, everyone who aspires to grow, to elevate, everyone who wants to heal and solve the illness inside us, every Benoni, which is essentially the whole world, that's whom it is for today. So the first half of this letter explains the danger and why we don't believe in putting pen to paper. In fact, the Baal Shem Tov once had a dream that he encountered the Satan. Rabbi Steinsaltz brings in his commentary on Tanya, carrying a sefer, and he challenged his Talmidim, Maggid of Mezrich and others, what is this book? Have you recorded my teachings? And they said, yes, we've started to record it. And he was very, very bothered because he understood from heaven that the message was not to record. Some things are meant to be communicated orally and directly and interpersonally and not to be put into paper. The same way that originally that oral Torah was meant to be communicated orally, and there's in fact a prohibition to record and to write the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah, and to write it down. That's why the Baal Shem, we have very few of his original writings. It's his Talmidim, it's the Toldos Yankov Yosef, it's others who record his teachings. But here the Balatanya then continues in this letter to explain and justify why it's necessary. He simply can't handle the masses. He can't handle the individuals who are interested in the interpersonal, one-on-one, yichidus, and the direct contact and conversations. And so what he does is, he says, I've collected the conversations, the correspondence, what's bothering and what's at the core of what people want to know, and I've put it organized my responses into this sefer. And this is essentially the parallel in the Torah Nistar to the Nigla. In the revealed world of Torah, what began as our oral Torah Sheba'al Peh, Eis Lasos Lashem, though it was far from ideal, ultimately it was chosen for it to be recorded and accessed. And where would we be today without Today we made a siyum on Masech Sanhedrin, Baruch Hashem. Going tonight to a siyum, someone's making a siyum in Shas. Where would we be today without the Torah Sheba'al Peh recorded as our Talmud? And what began in Chasidus as a Torah Sheba'al Peh, and that was the ideal way of communication. Eis lasos, what could be done? There was no choice. As he writes, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim, and therefore it needed to be recorded. It needed to be written down, and that is what he addresses. To every person in our community, everyone in our community found in this country, in White Russia and its environs and its area, there have already been intimate conversations. I've had so many and countless private meetings, and therefore you've revealed to me everything, the depths of your hearts and minds, the things that revolve around internally, what's in the heart. So now that I know, I'm able to record. Now, the Baal Tanya does not communicate it as a correspondence. He doesn't collect it as question and answer format. But he's saying, through the conversations I've had, through the direct contact, I know essentially what's at the core of what people want to know, what's bothering them, what we're trying to heal. And therefore, though it wasn't ideal, this is the only way to do it. First published in 1796, and it outgrows its initial core audience. And this Chaim Miller brings in his commentary of the 68 Hasidic books that were published from the movement's beginning until the end of 1815. The Tanya was reprinted the most, 11 times. And now, over 200 years after its initial publication, the Tanya is studied by tens of thousands across the globe. Maybe that's an underestimate, especially since we're now studying it together Wednesday mornings. It appears that the author achieved the very feat which he argued could not be done, to write a one-size-fits-all spiritual manual for a very broad audience. So while initially, and he writes, it's intended la'anshe shlomenu, for our own, whatever and however you define our own, now its relevance is far and wide and far, far beyond. And so he justifies the introduction to the Sefer essentially is a written justification for recording and writing the Sefer. And with that, let's at least begin Perek Aleph of Tanya, which begins as its title, one of its titles, suggests Tanya. Tanya, the Brisa, it's referencing a Brisa. The word Tanya is a Brisa. When the Talmud quotes a Brisa, it introduces it with the word Tanya. Tanya b'sof Perek Gimel Nida, at the end of the third Perek of Meseches Nida, the Brisa says the following: Mashbiyan osoti tzadik v'al tihi rasha. That before a child is born, before his soul that was created, Misheshis me Bereshis, Gemara says in Yevamos, Baal Tanya doesn't quote this, Gemara says in Yevamos, that when Hashem created the whole world, the 6 days of creation, he also created every soul that was destined to exist. And he has a celestial file cabinet. He has some storage, some arrangement of how he stores those souls. And when the time is right, he takes a soul and he puts it inside a body, and the body houses that soul for lucky 70 years, hopefully well beyond. And when the time comes, he extracts the soul from the body. And that's why Chazal, rather than have the word death, they don't use the term Misa. Chazal talk about Yitzias and Neshama, the extraction of the soul from the body, and the soul returns and restores back on high. So back to the Tanya. Tanya, Mashbir Osoti Tzadik V'Ati Rasha. That soul that's taken out of that celestial file system, because the time has been determined, it's to put it inside a body. So before that soul descends, that soul swears, is made to take an oath. And what's the oath it takes? Al Ti Tzadik, be righteous, V'al Tihi Rasha. Be a tzaddik, be a righteous person, and don't be wicked. And even if the whole world's going to tell you you're a tzaddik, you're such a big tzaddik from your kepala to your fitzalach, you're such a big tzaddik. No. You should nevertheless still consider yourself a Rasha. Don't have an inflated ego. Don't let it go to your head. Don't believe what your mother tells you. You're a little tzaddik, tzaddik will come here, tzaddik, tzaddik, tzaddik. Because the person who thinks, I'm such a tzaddik, I'm so perfect, I'm so righteous, I'm so right, everything's so great, it's a big danger. Such an inflated ego and sense of self, if a person thinks they're so perfect. So therefore, mashbian, we make the soul swear, be a tzaddik, strive to be a tzaddik, not Rasha, and the entire world will tell you, you're righteous, but you should consider yourself wicked. V'tzarech lahavin, says about Tanya, how are we meant to understand this? Datanan, because we have a separate Mishnah in Mesechus Avos, the second parak. Don't be a wicked person in your own eyes. Don't view yourself as wicked. Essentially, we're trying to strike a balance. If you see yourself as too perfect, too high, too righteous, there's a danger of a big ego, of arrogance. But also, our rabbis caution us, Don't be a wicked person in your own eyes. You know why? Because if you see yourself as unworthy, incapable, inconsequential, you see yourself as wicked, then why bother? Why go to shul? Why learn? Why give tzedakah? Why guard your eyes or your tongue? Why be righteous or right or virtuous if you see yourself already? And moreover, there's an obvious reason why the advice of Maseches Nida, consider yourself like a wicked person, would be counterproductive, would be self-sabotaging, would be dangerous. And here the Baal Tanya is a very prevalent idea in Chassidus. Rabbi Nachman writes a lot about it, and others. The kryptonite, we spoke about it last week on Shabbos Hagadol Drasha. The kryptonite of a Yid, the undoing of a Jew, what will guarantee our demise and our end is sadness, melancholy, depression. We're not talking about a clinical diagnosis out of someone's control, but we're talking about a person who allows or chooses to be sad, to be miserable, to be downtrodden, to be despondent, to be depressed. Atzvus is the kryptonite. It undermines. We're now Chodesh Nisan. We're days away from Pesach. Pasuk says, Ki besimcha seitzeyu. You want to get out of whatever you're being held back in life? Mitzrayim is Meitzar. Whatever constrictions, restrictions, the sky is falling, the walls are caving in. You want to break out and set yourself free? Ki besimcha seitzeyu. Then you got to be besimcha. You got to be joyful and enthusiastic, energized. But my parnasa and tariffs and the stock market and a war in Israel and what's going to be and Pesach preparations and the cost of matzah. Okay, b'cholzot. So what? Yeah. With that. So what? With that. So the Baal Tanya is bothered. What do you mean? If you'll see yourself as a Rasha, hopeless and helpless, it's going to make you depressed and downhearted. It's going to bring you down. And how can you worship Hashem? Ivdu as Hashem b'simcha. To serve Hashem with simcha, the skip in our step, with joy in our hearts, the smile on our panim, on our face. You have to be positive and upbeat and happy, because that creates our own reality, the energy we put into the universe. So the person is going to see themselves as, I'm a Rasha, I'm a lowly, nothing, good for nothing, Eisvav, reject, pathetic, failure. So then you're going to be sad and miserable and pessimistic and create that reality. But Hashem wants us to serve Him, b'simcha v'tuv levav. Now the Tanya does not quote that many explicit, exact references. But the Baal Tanya, of course, was well versed in the totality of Torah and is making allusions and references if a person is familiar. Here's one. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to serve Him. B'simcha v'tuv levav comes from Parshas Kisavo, the second Tochacha. When Hashem says, why do I visit this harsh punishment upon you? Because you don't serve me with joy, with a skip in your step, with happiness in your heart. Happiness is not an emotion. Happiness is a decision. So decide to be happy. Live a life of happiness. And if on the other hand, you don't become sad at all from that wickedness, so let's say you're not brought down by the idea that you're a Rasha. You're not saddened by it. You're not depressed by it. You're not struggling with it. You accept it. You're proud of it. You wear it with pride. So now imagine the danger. Person says, I'm a Rasha, careless and carefree, and I'm able to just live life, and all I care about is my pleasure seeker. That's also going to lead to very, very bad things. So Baal Tanya says, how are we meant to understand this brisa at the end of the third parak of Nida, that the soul takes an oath, be a tzaddik, not a rasha, but consider yourself, even the whole world tells you, you're a great tzaddik, from the Kepelah to Fitzalach, don't believe it, don't buy the hype, don't believe it. See yourself, and in your heart, see yourself as a rasha. But elsewhere, Chazal, the very same Chazal say, don't ever see yourself as a rasha. That will bring you down. How do we reconcile this contradiction? How do we reconcile? And the Baal Tanya here is addressing it from two perspectives. Number one, a lumdisha perspective. We have a contradiction between two statements of Chazal. So what's the lumdus? How do you reconcile a contradiction between two statements of Chazal? But moreover, he's asking, not only from a lumdish perspective, from an academic perspective, how do you reconcile a conflict of two statements of the same source, but moreover, just practically, methodologically, strategically, how will you live a righteous and a good life, a happy life, if you're knocking yourself down to see yourself as a rasha? So aside from the contradiction, the sources that need to be resolved, but just in terms of how we live life, how will it help or how will it resolve anything? How will it address any of our problems to knock ourselves down? One of two things will happen. We'll be miserable, bitter, negative, depressed, and that's the kryptonite of a yid. Or if we're careless and carefree, and we say, I'm a rasha, I might as well carpe diem, I'm just going to go have the pleasures of life, that's also not going to lead anywhere good or anywhere positive. And that's what the Baal Tanya in this first parak now is trying to resolve. But he's going to do it in a sheer klali style. You have to understand, the Baal Tanya is dealing with, you could call it machshava, pnimius, whatever you want to describe, but he's doing it like a Rosh Hashiva. First, he's going to build up a series of kashas. A good Rosh Hashiva in a shir klali, in the Beis Medrash, the yeshiva, he asks this question, then he asks another question, then he throws in a third question, he quotes these sources, they look like they all conflict and contradict one another, boom, then he gives you a yisod, he gives you an answer, and now that answer, all of a sudden you wonder, how did I not see that all along? That answer is so obvious, that answer is so compelling, that explains all the contradictions, now it all makes sense, now it all comes together. So this was the first question that he's asking, contradiction in the sources, and a contradiction to our own intuition about what will be good and uplifting, how to live life. And then he's going to ask another question. We'll stop here, but we find in the Gemara in Brachos 5 definitions. Tzadik v'tovlo, tzadik v'ralo, rasha v'tovlo, rasha v'ralo, benoni. Showing, good. What do these 5 definitions mean? How do we understand? And where do we see ourselves? And he's setting it up for what he calls the Sefer HaBeinonim. This is the book of the Beinonim. Chevra, we're a support group. This is a group of Beinonim. We're a community of Beinonim. We're a world of Beinonim. But he's building to be able to give that yesod, to give that answer and that definition of what's a Beinoni. And once we know and answer what is a Beinoni, now we can know how to navigate life as a Beinoni, as a card-carrying member of the Beinonim. We'll pick up Amir Hashem after Pesach, Achar Kosher, V'Sameach.